clock struck 2, and I held my breath. Every night, it's the same. Footsteps pacing across the hallway, steady, deliberate. Tonight, I was ready. I gripped the armrest, listening to the faint scuffing of shoes against the wooden floorboards. It was impossible, yet undeniably real. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer, waiting. I realized the house wasn't just old. It was alive in its own way, watching, breathing with me. Every creak, every whisper of wind became amplified. And then, the steps stopped, right outside my door. Silence, heavy and suffocating. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to confront whatever haunted this place. The fear in my chest was sharp, electric, almost tangible. My legs felt like lead as I stepped into the hallway. The familiar creak of the floorboards underfoot echoed like a warning. Each breath I took seemed amplified in the cold air, and the flashlight trembled in my hand, casting long, shaky shadows. I told myself this was just a trick of my mind, that fear was making the house alive. But deep down, I knew better. Something waited, just beyond the edge of the light. Something that had been patient for weeks, pacing in silence, letting me feel its presence without revealing itself. Tonight, I had to see it. Tonight, I had to understand. I whispered a quiet prayer to myself and took another step, each one heavier than the last, toward the unknown. The hallway felt alive. Every step I took, the air grew heavier, thicker with anticipation. I noticed the small rug I had left straight earlier was now skewed, the edges curling as if something had brushed past. The old coat hanging on the wall seemed to twitch, though no wind passed through. My heart pounded in rhythm with the faint footsteps echoing again, this time slower, deliberate, almost mocking. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's the house settling, but then I saw it. Faint dust patterns in the shape of tiny footprints leading further down the hallway. My mind raced. I had read about how fear can distort reality, how the human brain plays tricks in the dark. Yet these marks were real. Each one whispered a story, a history of what had happened here before I ever arrived. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost inaudible, brushing past my ear like a cold breath. I froze, the flashlight shaking violently in my hand. Follow, it seemed to say, or perhaps it was my mind, desperate to make sense of the impossible. The shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally, twisting, reaching. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. Fear wasn't just a sensation anymore. It was a presence, tangible and pressing, wrapping itself around my mind. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay rational, yet the rational voice was drowned out by the icy thrill of something watching me, something waiting to make itself known. I realized I couldn't just hide anymore. I had to see it. I had to confront the ghost. At this point, I have to ask, you've stayed with me this far, through the footsteps, the whispers, the moving shadows. If you enjoy true horror stories like this, take a moment to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. And if you've ever experienced something unexplained in your own home, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Sharing these stories reminds us we're not alone in our fear, and that fear itself can teach us to notice the subtle things we often ignore. But enough reflection. The presence waits, patient, and tonight I'm going to discover what it wants. I had never noticed the chest before. It sat there in the corner, cloaked in shadows, as if it had waited for me to notice it. The wood was old, scarred, and a faint metallic smell drifted from the rusted lock. Something about it felt alive, as if it pulsed in rhythm with the footsteps I'd heard nightly. My hands shook as I tried to open it, the key long missing. Dust and cobwebs fell around me, and for a moment, I felt an odd sense of calm, as if the presence wanted me to find this. I realized that sometimes, fear isn't just about what you hear, it's about what is hidden from you. And in that moment, I understood the house held a secret tied to these footsteps, waiting to reveal itself. And then I saw it. A figure, faint and trembling, emerging from the mist, a child, no more than 8, translucent yet impossibly real. Its eyes were hollow but pleading, and I felt the weight of loneliness, fear, and longing emanating from it. The footsteps I had heard every night weren't meant to scare me. They were a call for attention, a message from a presence trapped in limbo. My breath caught in my throat, and I wanted to run, yet something compelled me to stay. The child's gaze seemed to pierce through me, and in that moment, I understood the tragedy of the house, the lingering sorrow, and the way fear and memory intertwine in places abandoned too long. I took a careful step forward, whispering the child's name that I didn't even know, but somehow felt connected to. The fog swirled faster, the shadows dancing wildly across the walls. The footsteps continued, but now softer, almost hesitant, as if the presence was curious, testing me. Fear still clutched at my chest, but it was mixed with empathy. I realized that often, we fear what we don't understand. And understanding, even in the face of terror, can transform fear into compassion. I spoke again, my voice steady despite the trembling inside me. And then, the child stopped moving, looking at me with eyes that seemed to ask for closure, for someone to remember, for someone to finally acknowledge the footsteps that had haunted the house for so long. The journal was brittle and yellowed, written in a delicate, looping hand. It told of a child who vanished one cold night at 2 a.m., footsteps echoing down the hallway, as if searching for someone, anyone. The entries spoke of loneliness, curiosity, and the child's fear, yet a hope that someone would remember. I understood then. The footsteps weren't malicious. They were a call for recognition, a soul trapped between worlds because it had been forgotten. Every night, I had been listening, unknowingly offering attention. Fear had guided me here, but understanding brought clarity. The house itself seemed to exhale as I read the final words. If someone listens, I am never alone. In that moment, I realized the haunting had purpose, a lesson about memory, acknowledgement, and the human need to be seen. The child's figure slowly dissolved into the fog, and the footsteps ceased. Silence returned, yet it was not empty. It was filled with understanding, an acknowledgement shared between the living and the lost. The hallway felt less oppressive, lighter in its shadows, as if the presence itself had found some peace. I realized that fear often blinds us to the truth. We see only the movement of shadows, the sound of footsteps, the cold pressing in. But understanding the story behind them can transform terror into empathy that I knew I would never forget these nights, these echoes of a forgotten life. And though the house still held its dark corners, the oppressive dread had lifted, replaced with a haunting, melancholic remembrance. Sitting in the quiet hallway, I reflected on what had transpired. Fear had guided me, yet empathy had allowed me to see beyond it. We fear the unknown, yet the unknown is often simply a story we haven't understood. The child's footsteps, once a source of terror, became a lesson, to notice, to remember, to empathize. I realized how easily we ignore subtle signs around us, dismissing them as coincidence or imagination. But sometimes, paying attention is the difference between haunting and healing. In the silence, I whispered a final acknowledgement to the presence, knowing that someone, finally, had listened. The hallway seemed to exhale, and for the first time, I felt not fear, but a solemn peace, tempered with the lingering mystery of what we can never fully explain. I finally left the hallway, walking toward the front door, flashlight in hand, the echoes of footsteps no longer following. The house remained old, dark, and alive, but it no longer felt hostile. Some mysteries endure, and some lessons are learned in fear. I realized that acknowledging the unseen, paying attention to the forgotten, and facing our fears head-on can transform even terror into understanding. As I stepped outside, the cold night air washed over me, carrying the whispers of history and memory. And though I left the house behind, the lessons of those footsteps would remain with me forever, a reminder that fear is often just the beginning of a story, not its end. Outside, the house sat silent under the moonlight, its secrets folded into the night. I couldn't say if the footsteps would ever return, but I understood their purpose. Fear had brought me to the truth, and understanding had given it closure. This story is a reminder. Sometimes, the scariest moments are also the most enlightening. They teach us about perception, empathy, and the unseen stories that linger in spaces we think are empty. Perhaps somewhere, a presence listens for acknowledgement, waiting to be remembered. And perhaps, like me, we all have moments where we must confront what haunts us, not just in houses, but in memory and imagination. Fear and mystery are intertwined, and in that darkness, lessons can be found. Fear is powerful, but understanding can transform even the darkest footsteps into lessons of empathy and memory. If you enjoyed this story, like and share it, comment with your own paranormal encounters, and subscribe for more chilling tales that will keep you up at night.